Yep, Dominic Williams, welcome to Rising Giants podcast. It's great to have you on. This is basically our 150th episode of the podcast. So, yeah, as a Brit, it's great to have the British ambassador come and share about his story. So, yeah, first thing first, can you just share a bit more about how you got going in the Foreign Service and some of the places that you have been posted to before taking on the British ambassadorship in Cambodia?
Yeah, sure. Very happy to. And thank you for having me for your 150th episode. I quite often get asked this question, how I started in diplomacy. My usual answer is that the young Cambodians that I meet here every day are far more impressive than I was at their age.
Yeah.
So I have young people at age 15 coming up to me saying, what do I need to study to get achieving scholarship so I can do my master's in the UK and then I can go on and do this amazing thing in government, in business or whatever. When I went to university, I had no idea what I wanted to do. But fortunately for me, the people around me were much more clued up and they were all applying for internships. And I thought I really have to get a grip and work out what I want to do with my life. So I went to the University Careers Service, who said to me, Dominic, what do you want to do? I said, no, you misunderstand me. If I knew what I wanted to do, I wouldn't have come to talk to you. Yes. But through a conversation with them, I just sort of had been reading books about diplomacy. I said it sounded interesting. And I was lucky enough that they could sort of set out to me the different routes that you can take to get into diplomacy. And I found out about an internship scheme that our Foreign Office in the UK at the time was running. I applied, I was lucky I got it, and they sent me to work as an intern in our embassy in Paris. And so that was the sort of start for me. And I loved that internship. So then I went back to my last year at university, applied to join on the graduate program while studying my last year, and then joined 20 years ago this year, funnily enough. Wow. And then from there, my career sort of took me to different places. I worked in Sri Lanka for about 3.5 years during its civil war. Wow. I went to work on the Middle East back in London during the Arab Spring. I then went to Peru, which was a bit of a change in focus for me because it was much more trade and economic diplomacy there, whereas I'd worked quite a lot on conflict up to that point. And then went from there to Nigeria. And then from Nigeria, went back to the UK to study Khmer before coming here.
Mm. And yeah, your preparation for each country, is it always required to learn the local language?
So really, it does really vary. And we had a foreign secretary now kind of 15 years ago when he came in. So that was William Hague, who was really, really keen on language learning. And so he wanted ambassadors to speak the local language. So actually, I'm only the second British ambassador that's benefited in Cambodia from Khmer language training. So it has changed a bit over the years, and we've become more serious about it as something we require our diplomats to do. So I didn't have that opportunity when I was in Sri Lanka. I did off my own back do some lessons in Sinhala and Tamil, but I never achieved a good level of fluency. But for Latin America, for Peru, I did need to get my Spanish good. So I did spend time preparing for that. In Nigeria, there are over 250 local languages. And the link language between communities in Nigeria is English. So again, there isn't a requirement for us to learn it there. And I didn't manage to pick up anything other than some Pidgin English or Nigerian Pidgin. But here it was quite intense.
And so how does Cambodia compare to all those other countries in terms of like living and your like sort of the lifestyle that it looks like in comparison to maybe working in some of these more conflict zones or, yeah.
So, I think the thing that I always say, I'm quite an optimist, is that when you live overseas, you can choose if you want to focus on the things that are more difficult in the place you live. But I always choose to focus on the things that are positive about the place that I live, because that leads, I think, to you having a happier life. Right. So actually, I've really enjoyed everywhere that I've worked. There have been some really, really big differences. And so if I think about the things that I really like about living in Phnom Penh, it is a very safe place to be, and you can walk out on the streets after dark without worrying about your safety and security. That's not something that I've been able to do everywhere that I've lived. So that's a real positive. And particularly I'm here with a family. So, with my young children, to feel that we're able to walk out on the streets, go to public parks, and that there isn't a sort of risk or a threat in doing that is really positive.
Yeah, Lagos and Colombo, I presume. No?
So I was in Abuja.
Okay, sorry, Abuja. Yeah,
but in Abuja, we could walk, but you didn't walk out after dark, and you had to be in general cautious. And our security rules meant we couldn't very much travel around the country. Right. So there was only one place we were really allowed to go to for weekends away. and we had to hire an armed police escort to do it. So it's a very odd experience driving to the hills with your wife and children on the back seat when you've got an armed policeman with an AK-47 between his legs in the front passenger seat next to you.
Tough for the kids, yeah.
Yeah, and it was a very, I mean, he was a lovely guy, Sergeant Gabriel, shout out to him, but it was definitely an odd weekend away. Whereas in Phnom Penh, you can jump in your car and you can go anywhere in the country, and there's amazing places to visit in Cambodia, and it's safe to do so. And the other thing that I really like here as well is that actually it's a really livable city. It's easy to get around Phnom Penh. People do complain to me about the traffic, but when you've lived, when you lived through the Lagos, I didn't live in Lagos, but I visited regularly. When you've seen the Lagos go-slows, or you've seen the traffic that you get in Lima in Peru, a city of 9 million people with no real public transport network, then the traffic here really is not a problem at all. Yeah,
I mean, even since I've been here since 2020, I mean, there's a lot more cars on the road, but yeah, if you compare it to even just Manila, Bangkok, Ho Chi Minh, I mean it's a lot better. So what was it like arriving here? What were some of the I mean, I'm sure you were you learned so much before you came. You said 18 months of preparation, but what was sort of maybe some of the things that were slightly different, the perception versus reality on the ground upon arriving?
So, I mean, I always felt that in Cambodia there was sort of huge opportunities for us. And one of the things that did surprise me when I got here in a positive way was actually just how many British people and organisations there are here doing fantastic things. And a lot of it doesn't have any connection to government, so I'm not going to claim credit for it.
Right.
But you've got like fantastic British business people running businesses right across the country. There's Brits who came here. The story I quite often hear is I came here on holiday 10 years ago for 2 months. Right. And actually fell in love with Cambodia, and I've set up a business. So one of the owners of Seeker's Spirits, is
Tanya. Yeah, Tanya. We've had her on the podcast.
Yeah. So she's she and her husband, who's Spanish German, but they've set up their business here after falling in love with the country, and that's a lovely story. And you see that replicated across the country. People have done the same with NGOs. There's a lady, Maggie Eno, who's a Brit down in Sunukville, who set up an NGO called Malop Tabang, that sort of started out working with school children and street children, and now provides this amazing all-round service to help children stay with their families safely and securely and make sure that they get an education. There are Brits working at the Anchor Hospital for Children, which provides free cutting-edge cancer treatment, trauma treatment for children from right across the country. So right across the country, I was really positively surprised about the amount that British people were doing and British organisations were doing. On the flip side, I think that what also sort of maybe surprised me a little bit was I think that Brits, and you might find this as a Brit yourself, we kind of sometimes in the public perception of Cambodia get a little bit blurred into what I call the Anglosphere. So, people don't necessarily distinguish between an Australian, a Brit, an American, because we all speak English, and all live far away. So with that sort of perception that we're all sort of merged into one. And I still have it now when people comment on my Facebook page. They quite often think I'm the Australian ambassador. So, which is fine. He's a good friend, and I have a lot of love for Australia.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, and what would you say? What would you say the focus has been of like the British activities here in Cambodia, and how is that maybe evolving or changing as you enter your post, or as some new priorities get sort of pushed?
So, I mean, I was lucky that I arrived here at quite an interesting time when we've been at the UK, that has been expanding its relationships right across Southeast Asia. So we joined ASEAN as a dialogue partner in 2021. And the first full ASEAN set of meetings that we participated in as a dialogue partner were the ones that took place in Cambodia in 2022.
Oh, yeah.
And because of wanting to do more with ASEAN and in this region, we increased our staffing at our embassies across the region. So that was sort of very positive for me and for the embassy here and what we're able to do. And some of that is about geopolitics and Cambodia's place in the world. So a big part of our work is working with Cambodia on international issues. So we talk to them quite a lot about what's going on in other countries. So Cambodia's been very supportive on Ukraine, for example, in supporting activity at the UN to hold Russia to account for its invasion. But we talk about other issues, Myanmar in particular, where Cambodia has had a real interest, particularly when
playing
it was
quite a role. Yeah,
when it was chair of ASEAN. So we talk quite a lot about regional issues, global issues, and our involvement in ASEAN and wanting to do more in partnership with ASEAN. So that's sort of, it's work with Cambodia, but it's not necessarily about Cambodia. And then when we look at the country itself, kind of what I try and frame a lot of our work around is bringing all the tools that we've got to bear behind working with Cambodia to support the next stage of its economic development. So last year, the UN formally agreed that Cambodia would graduate from least developed country status in 2029. So that's a kind of a technical decision made by the UN, but it comes with some real consequences. It means that for some countries, Cambodia will not benefit from trade concessions, so won't benefit from low tariffs on getting their goods into those markets. It means Cambodia will be less able to access concessional finance through development finance institutions.
Yep.
And it usually means, although this is not sort of strict, it usually means that countries will reduce the amount of overseas development assistance support they give to countries once they graduate, because the focus is typically out on the least developed countries. And so that's a big moment for Cambodia, and it's got a timeline now to prepare for it.
And there's no way that can be delayed.
I mean, these things always can be, but this was actually, it's based on macroeconomic indicators, and Cambodia has met those for many years. So in just strictly on GDP and GDP per capita terms, Cambodia long ago stopped being a least developed country.
Right.
But there's other factors that they take into account. And this period to 2029 is a longer than usual transition period. It was a 5-year transition period. Typically before that, I think it had been 2 years. So of course, nothing is irreversible, but I think it would be quite difficult for that decision to change. And that's why Cambodia's got the transition period, is to be able to work on it. And so what we're trying to do is bring our commercial expertise, our development support to help Cambodia develop sectors of the economy that will help it continue to grow, that will help it become more competitive so it can compete and win when some of those sort of preferential tariff rates are taken away, and that it has structures in place to be able to invest in its own developments when things like concessional finance start drying up a bit.
Okay. And so how does that relate to kind of what you will be focused on achieving, as part of your post and role here? What would you say is the main emphasis on this next stage of development in the country, and how British businesses and the British government can be involved in that?
Yes, I mean, I appreciate what I've said is kind of a little bit abstract, so making it a bit more real world is probably helpful.
Yeah.
I mean, we've kind of focused on 3 big sectors where we think the UK's got a contribution and where we think we can play a role in supporting Cambodia. So those are education, infrastructure, and financial services.
Okay.
And education, I mean, obviously Cambodia wants to diversify the sort of sectors of the economy, particularly the export sectors, and it's got a strategy to move into more advanced manufacturing. But to succeed in those areas, then you need new skills. So that requires education. And I mean, you've probably heard it from businesses. I hear it from businesses here all the time. When you want to attract investment into the country to create jobs and to grow the economy, you need the skilled workforce to move into those jobs. And I hear from British businesses all the time that there are skills that you just can't get in Cambodia now, that you just have to bring in. You either have to recruit a Cambodian who studied overseas or bring in an expatriate worker. So to give just one example, we've got a big British company here, Prudential, that works on insurance. There are nowhere in Cambodia can you be trained as an actuary. So that's fundamental skill for the insurance industry. But you can't be trained as an actuary here, so that you have to buy that in. So right across the education sector, we want to work to help Cambodia develop the skills that will help it have the ability to succeed in new and more advanced sectors of its economy. And there's a lot that we've been doing there on the development side in terms of support for the state education system, but also, through schooling. We've got now 5 British international schools in Phnom Penh. First British university opened here last year, De Montfort University.
And that's all basically happened in the last, the British international schools you mentioned, I believe that's all happened in the last handful of years. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So when I arrived, Shrewsbury School, Phnom Penh, and King's School, Vatinakville were just launching. So they've been present here now about 3 years. And then Bromsgrove International School and Reigate Grammar School are both launching this September. And then we've had Northbridge, which has been here for a long time and is long established. But the other 4 are all new. And De Montfort launched last September. It's undergraduate and postgraduate courses. So we'll be starting its 2nd academic year this September. So that's been an area where we've been able to do quite a lot, which feels really positive. And then on infrastructure, we've had some quite big successes in the infrastructure space. So things like the new Phnom Penh airport,
right? Yeah, I was wanting to dive into that. But just quickly on the education side, I think that obviously the international schools are going to have a big impact. I almost feel like the universities setting up campuses here may even have a greater impact because there's so much expertise that you can bring from like a campus that you already have established, let's say in the UK, that would then you'd be maybe doing these like study abroad programs that you can rotate between things. So do you see more British universities looking to come here? Would you expect more to be announced as time goes on?
So I would definitely expect more British degree programs to be available here that give you the full British degree. And in fact, I can't say because they haven't announced it yet, but there is another British university that will be launching degree programs here in Cambodia in September.
Great.
And that will be in partnership. So they won't set up their own campus, but you will be able to get their full degree here in Cambodia. And I expect more of that kind of partnership model where degree programs are being delivered in partnership with a local institution.
Right. And that really validates that degree and, helps. Yeah, I think that's a really helpful thing.
And it's easier to attract more universities into that sort of model because setting up a campus is a big capital investment. And so that's always going to be a slightly higher barrier to entry for firms coming in. Whereas if they can, work with an institution that already has a facility, then actually the costs of setup and coming in are lower. So I'm confident that we'll have more universities using that model over the next couple of years. So we've got one certainly starting in September, but I would expect more to follow. And then whether we have anyone else set up a campus, I don't know. I think there is interest. And the fact that De Montfort University, this says a lot about Cambodia. I've had a lot of people in the British higher education sector say to me, how did De Montfort set up here so fast? Because it went from the first email they sent to me was in February 2023. They had a launch event in September 2023. So it took 6 months from them to go from we're thinking about Cambodia to actually having their site identified here and be working on that. And only a year and a half before they actually launched their programs. So that's incredibly quick compared to how these things usually work. And that's partly down to, in Cambodia, as you know, when you can kind of find an area where your interests align, people are able to move really fast. The government here was incredibly supportive of that. So that sort of, again, is a signal to our higher education sector that Cambodia is actually a place where you can get things done fast.
And then obviously the other side of things, I think as of now, the UK is number 3 in terms of the amount of students that choose to go and get their university degrees in the UK. And of course, there are some very high profile people that, even the current Prime Minister got his degree from Bristol and a few other places. So, yeah, maybe talk a bit more about that and the growth that you see there on a lot of these, let's say the up and coming new generation of Cambodia. They're going to have a big impact on this country who have had their formidable years in the UK.
Yeah, we certainly see it. And I talk to a lot of people in government whose children are now studying in the UK. And it has become an increasingly popular destination, which I think is a reflection of the quality of British education. British university education is recognised worldwide. And I think I saw the new QS rankings come out yesterday for universities. And, top university is still a US university. I think Massachusetts Institute of Technology. But number 2 is Imperial College. We also have Oxford and Cambridge in the top 10. We also have UCL in the top 10. So actually, British universities compete globally as the best. And I think people here recognize that and want to have that kind of quality. So we've seen the number of students roughly double over the last 5 years or so, to having about 500 Cambodians studying in the UK at the moment. And as you say, a lot of those are from very prominent and influential families, and are people that we expect with a UK education behind them to go on to be the future leaders of Cambodia. But one of the things we're proud about with De Montfort University being here is it just makes that accessible to many more people, because it's not everybody who can afford to go overseas to study with the living expenses and so on that go with that.
Right.
And there's also a kind of interesting gender angle to De Montfort being here.
Yeah.
Because what we found is not all families by any stretch of the imagination, but there are some families that are more nervous about sending their daughters overseas and being a long way away from home. So that sort of was a bit of a gender barrier to women, young women having access to the same educational opportunities. But actually, when you've got a campus here and people can be at home and families can then feel more secure, that really sort of levels that for women who want to get a British degree.
Right. And then moving on to you mentioned about infrastructure and financial services. Yeah, I think the huge thing in infrastructure, of course, is the new airport that will be officially opening in September, October. And of course, Foster's and Partners have been the main engineering firm behind that. So that's great to see. So maybe just touch on a bit more about that. And do you think we're going to have there might even be direct flights between Phnom Penh and London one day? How do you see? I mean, maybe more broadly, how do you see that? I mean, this could, as per what they say, it's going to be the 9th largest airport in the world once they've fully completed all of it. What impact do you see that having on the country?
I mean, personally, I think the Foster and Partner design, and I've been lucky enough to go to the airport 4 times now, and I'll be going again next week. So It's been nice to sort of see it at various stages of construction. But it is a cathedral-like building. And I think the impact that it will make on foreign arrivals will be huge, because you do walk into literally...
It sets the tone, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it says something about... It's a statement about Cambodia, because it's modern, it's ambitious, it projects dynamism, but at the same time, it's got inspiration from traditional Cambodian culture. So actually the design inside has this kind of lattice that is inspired by Cambodian fishing baskets. So it is authentically Cambodian, but very modern, very dynamic and very ambitious. So I think that it's a big statement about Cambodia. And I think that sort of investing in the way that the government has done in building the capacity. So, they've got various stages of expansion, as you suggested, that they can keep growing the capacity at the airport. So I think it will, I think it should become a bit like Changi in Singapore, where it becomes almost a tourist destination in its own right. I was in Singapore back in April, and I was looking what are the best things to do in Singapore. And going to Changi Airport, going to see the Jewel and having a meal and see the Jewel is one of the things to do. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if for the Tai Chow International Airport, that becomes the same. It becomes a must-do in Phnom Penh as a site in its own right, and that people go there just to eat dinner or whatever because it's such a spectacular environment. So I do think it will have a big impact. I think there's big potential for its role in trade, I think, in the short term. So the expansion of cargo facilities through the new airport, because it is much bigger, there'll be much more warehousing facilities and so on. So I think the role it can play in enabling the cargo industry to expand in the short term will be really important. With tourists, airlines always make these decisions based on numbers. And Cambodia is already, in the time I've been here, and I'm guessing some of this is kind of post-COVID recovery, but the number of airlines that fly here has expanded. So when I was coming out here initially, my choices were really Singapore Airlines or Thai Airways from the UK. But now you've got Emirates route re-established. You've got the Qatar route. You've got Turkish Airlines starting direct routes at the end of this year. So I think the Turkish route will be really important. I think other European airlines will
And that would be Phnom Penh to Turkey directly?
So as I understand it, it will start with a stopover in Bangkok and then go to Istanbul. It'll be Istanbul, Bangkok, Phnom Penh, Bangkok, Istanbul. But I think other European airlines will be watching that route quite carefully to see what sort of demand there is. And if there's a lot of demand for that route, I can definitely see other European carriers being interested in establishing direct routes here. But it is one of those things. These are not decisions that are taken, emotionally or anything like that. They're taken based on hard data, because it is an expensive industry, and they want to be confident if they're starting new routes that the returns will be there.
Right. Yeah, and then what other aspects of infrastructure would you say where you see sort of good development and where you're involved?
So, I mean, I think it's a sector that we're keen to have more British presence here in, and we have had some big successes. And I should say, the airport is designed by Foster and Partners, but it's quite a nice example of international cooperation, because the engineering is by a Korean company, the construction is being done by a Chinese company, so it's sort of quite an international focused project. But a lot of the successes we've had in that space so far have been on architecture. So people don't realise it, but a lot of the Phnom Penh skyline is British design. So the Batanak Capital Tower is designed by Furrells. the Exchange Square by ADAS, the Chitmong Tower also by ADAS, I believe. So there's quite a number of the skyscrapers across Phnom Penh are designed by British architecture companies. So that's probably the area where actually we've had the most impact so far. We have had a British engineering involved in some of those as well. So Arup did the engineering for the Vatanak Capital Tower, for example. But we would like to get more of our engineering firms in here because we think the quality that they deliver is very high. And when you look at the Vatanak Capital Tower, for example, I think it's one of the best designed and best functioning buildings that there is in Phnom Penh. And obviously had a heavy British involvement in achieving that. So we're trying to work with British firms to create new opportunities to bring them in, and particularly in green and sustainable infrastructure. So to help Cambodia also with its net zero transition. And we've got a partnership with the government at the moment to look for opportunities where we can work on projects together in that space, bringing in British commercial expertise along with our development assistance to pull those both together to make an impact. So it's an area where I'm hopeful we will have some exciting new projects to be able to show people in the near future, but not yet at the stage where we can announce them.
Okay. And you also then the third thing you mentioned was financial services. I do think there's been, obviously I sort of have a bit of experience in that sector. And there's definitely been a lot of progress with the professionalization of financial services in Cambodia. Of course, obviously the big four accounting firms with their British, having almost all been started in the UK, have been operating here. And we see the amount of accountants that are now in the market and supporting businesses. That's really improving. The amount of audits that are being done, all this stuff is very good. I think there is probably a lot of improvement that can be seen on let's say the KYC side of things and the anti-money laundering. I think we've seen, especially in Singapore, that Cambodia is still sort of looked down upon and put in this very much like a frontier market category in terms of how easily capital can flow in and out and such. And so that we have issues with that. We're always dealing with that in Singapore. We're trying to say, this is the new Cambodia. Look at, Grab just acquired Nam 24. There are startups here. There are new businesses here that are really run as professional as possible. But I think I think there needs to be a lot more improvement on that because we get lumped in as the kind of like frontier markets of the region, being like Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar. But I really hope at some point Cambodia can really graduate beyond that. But it just takes a lot of people really pushing and making that clear. And these examples of success stories that have gone on to go, like, let's say, regional, whether they're regionally banked or regionally acquired, that kind of thing.
No, I agree. And it is an area that we are looking to work on. And I would say we've got some fairly new projects in this area. So at the moment, it's quite hard to say exactly where they're going to focus on, but we've got an initiative and we've recruited a new staff member actually at the embassy to lead this work, but very newly, as in sort of 4 weeks ago, to lead work on regulatory reform. So this is basically working with the Cambodian government on priority issues of regulatory reform that will address some of the concerns that investors have and that will create opportunities for growth. And so we haven't yet defined exactly which areas, which is your obvious question to me, which areas of regulation are you going to focus on? We haven't yet defined that, but that's the goal, is to sort of strengthen the regulations in a way that supports growth here. And we're also looking with the UK Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, to do some capacity building work with them, with their Cambodian counterparts. And again, these are sort of bits of work on the plumbing, but that are really important for reassuring investors about Cambodia as a market and where we'd like to play a role in helping Cambodia give that reassurance. And then beyond that, on the financial services, we've got a couple of big UK firms here beyond the big four. So we've also got Standard Chartered, who do wholesale banking, not retail, but wholesale banking. And then Prudential in the insurance industry.
What do you mean by wholesale banking?
So they bank the bankers.
They bank the bankers.
Yeah, exactly. So
interesting.
So it's not like you can go and open a Standard Chartered bank account as an individual customer, as I had when I was in Nigeria. So they do, Standard Chartered do that banking, but not in every market.
Right, because they just have a small. I think they've got a small office at Himawari, And I was wondering. I was curious what they do here. But as you say, they bank the bankers. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So we have some presence here, but financial services, as you know, is an enormous area of the UK economy. I think it generates like 10% of our GDP. It's huge, and we've got world-leading expertise in that area. Definitely. So it's an obvious area for us to look for further opportunities. And I think with Cambodia's growth trajectory and its development trajectory, those opportunities are going to materialize in the coming years. So we want to make sure that we're sort of working with the grain of that, spotting the opportunities early and bringing in our firms as we can.
Do you know this amazing success story? Of course, I mean, I use them pretty much most days. Revolut, the fintech, I think they've got 50 million customers worldwide. They've just launched in Singapore, and we're actually trying to work with them for a lot of our portfolio companies because they're a little bit more dynamic with how they kind of understand risk, and they can they just can do better analysis than traditional banks, which makes them more comfortable to work with startups. Let's say, being a startup themselves. So yeah, I was actually thinking I want to try and talk to them about coming and entering this market at some point, but. I mean, right now they have you can do a transfer between a UK your UK Revolut bank account to ABA, and it take a day or two, much quicker than let's say a Barclays or a HSBC, who I think make it quite complicated. So yeah, I would be really interesting to see if you could see some like British banks open here. Maybe they actually open for like retail customers, but yet to be seen. I mean, obviously banking's a very sensitive sector. Obviously ABA has done super well, but yeah, it'd be interesting to see if any British banks decide to open in Cambodia one day.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't rule it out, but it does feel to me like this is an economy that doesn't lack banks.
Right.
There are a lot of banks in this market already. Right. So, I mean, it's not an area where I necessarily see UK firms entering immediately, but some of the more fintech type products, I think there is definitely scope. And you mentioned Revolut. I use Wise, which is another British company, and I use them here. You can't have a real wallet yet, but I would like to see that one day. But you can have one in Thai baht, for example, or I think Vietnamese dong as well. So if you go to those countries, you can just transfer immediately from your UK account into local currency, and it's done in minutes, and spend on your card straight away. Yeah, and I would love to see that be the case for the Khmer Real as well. So some of the fintech solutions I think we could bring in. And then the other part of the financial services that we're sort of working on relates to what I said at the start about concessional finance. And actually, when Cambodia graduates, it's going to need more diverse sources of finance to continue to invest in the things that they need to continue development. So, infrastructure, education, healthcare, all of these things will still need investment. And so if there is less concessional finance available, where's that going to come from? And an obvious tool that governments have in their toolboxes, which Cambodia doesn't much use at the moment, is bonds, like government bonds. And so we're sort of doing some work to support the development of capital markets here, both the government bond market, but also capital market for companies.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously, the CSX, Thailand has 500 plus stocks. Singapore's got nearly 1,000. Sadly, we're only sitting at about 10 or 15 now. So I think there could be a lot more emphasis on that. But to be honest, the other side of that is like the amount of stock accounts that exist in the market is only about 50,000 or so. Last time we checked, there's more crypto wallets than there are stock accounts, for example. So yeah, I think there could be a lot more emphasis pushed on capital markets, but it just seems like they need a lot of. It would be really useful to have some best practices on come in and some real focus from some of these development partners to push that.
Yeah, and so it's an area that we want to work on, the capital market itself. And then alongside that, there's all the other sort of tools that Cambodia doesn't much make use of at the moment. So we have a fantastic offer of UK Export Finance, which is our export credit guarantee agency. And they've got a risk appetite of up to £2 billion for Cambodia, and it's completely untapped at the moment. And obviously it's designed to help British companies work here, but it's quite flexible in terms of how it can be used. In general, it's a guarantee, so it reduces the cost of borrowing, but they can do direct lending. There are other ways that they can structure deals. There needs to be some British commercial involvement, but it's a really useful tool that is there for Cambodian private sector companies, but the government to use. And then alongside that, through our development finance institutions, we're working with the Credit Guarantee Corporation of Cambodia to help them develop their SOPs and to actually start providing guarantees in market to Cambodian companies to reduce their cost of borrowing as well. And these are all kind of tools that, as the market here matures and develops, are really, really useful for investing in the economy and in growth.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I remember seeing like there was a big, when Myanmar was still sort of, when the business environment was more active in Myanmar a handful of years ago when I was coming to the region, the British, I think it's called something different, but now it's called British International Investment. Is that right?
Yes. Used to be called CDC.
CDC, right. And they were very active in Myanmar. And I was always sort of wondering, okay, why, maybe there'll be like an actual office set up for that equivalent in Cambodia. Do you see that happening whereby they actually like commit to this in terms of investment?
So they actually have invested in Cambodia already. They have a few investments here. They cover Cambodia out of their Singapore office, but they do come here regularly and we talk to them regularly. Okay. Their investments in Cambodia are all in the sort of sustainable energy space. So one example that I've been to is the solar-powered water pump that pumps water from the Mekong and supplies that water to farmers through irrigation channels. So, the revenue comes from the farmers purchasing access to that water.
I believe you also were so the previous company I worked for were a big investor in this company called Khmer Water Supply Holding.
Yeah.
Is that, I didn't know if...
That's not BII. That's through another British-backed development. Well, it's not uniquely British. It's a developed finance institution called the Private Infrastructure Development Group. Right. So the UK is the major investor in the pitch.
Yeah. I saw you were there,
But it also has backing from the Australian government, I think from the Swiss government, from the Dutch, and I've probably missed off one or two, for which apologies. But so the UK is a major investor in that, and they have invested in KWASH.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, I mean, that's a great success story and, very much well needed. But yeah, as you say, okay, so their focus has been more on the sustainable energy sector. Is that focus going to shift or is it going to stay there? What do you see their activities looking like?
So, I think that focus is there to stay because it's part of our global commitments to green finance. And we've made some quite big, ambitious commitments as a government. So, and they had, I think, £500 million that they have available to invest, but across Southeast Asia. So that's not, sadly, they're not all for Cambodia. But all of that money is sort of part of our global climate commitment, and so therefore that focus will very much stay. And I would like to see them do more here, and we are talking to them. Particularly, I think there are interesting opportunities that are not quite mature enough yet for them to sort of commit to, but on things like the ASEAN green power grid that's being talked about, the idea of having solar power plants here that supply energy to Singapore and elsewhere. These are all fantastic projects that, potentially there could be a role for BII.
Okay. Great. Yeah. And one other thing to touch on, obviously quite topical, this whole, let's say, emphasis that has now been placed on tariffs, right? And, as put up by the US. Obviously, Cambodia got into the limelight because of having the highest tariff of any country or proposed tariff. And a lot of that, is this garment industry. But of course, it's very unlikely the garment industry will operate in the US significantly. That's at least what people think. So, maybe just beyond that, right? That's I think what is good to see is like a country like the UK and Cambodia, like this relationship that we have. It's currently a big trade deficit, but it's something that I think is that the UK is happy for that to remain like that. So maybe you could just touch on that and like I don't know if you have the data on it, but what % of Cambodia's exports go to the UK, and how do you see that kind of evolving through time?
Yeah, sure. So, the first thing I would say is that, we in the UK reached an agreement with the US on tariffs fairly recently, which we're very...
And what a day to do it.
Yes.
Yeah, what a day to do it. Yeah.
So we're very proud of that, but that also shows, that through negotiation, it's possible to reach a solution on these. And we know that Cambodia has a process of dialogue, so we very much wish them well in those conversations. From the UK perspective, we have a scheme called the Developing Countries Trading Scheme, which is our system of preferential tariffs for developing countries. And that recognizes that trade and exports are a really important route out of poverty for many people, a really important route to developing economies. So it provides 0% tariffs, 0% quotas to developing countries for... And depends there's different categories of it, but Cambodia benefits from the most generous category, which basically means 99% of product lines from Cambodia can enter the UK without any tariffs at all and without any quotas. So that's sort of a big part of our support for Cambodia. And it's a big factor for companies actually in thinking about where to set up their manufacturing hubs. Yeah. That, knowing what sort of access they're going to have to the UK market is important. And Cambodia is one of the countries that makes most use of that scheme globally, which is really positive and is, I think, a factor in why our trading relationship is so substantial. So it's about £1 billion a year in trade, and about 70% of that is exports going from Cambodia to the UK, primarily garments, footwear, travel goods, and bicycles. But we're kind of keen to help them expand those areas. We, as a market, the percent, I've got a figure in my head, but I'm not confident it's the right figure. The one that I use more often, so I am confident on, is that last year we were the 8th largest export market for Cambodia. Okay. Yeah. So that's significant. And that was something that surprised me when I came here. I wasn't, just based on ties of history and so on, before I started preparing to come to Cambodia, I wouldn't have guessed the UK was a top 10 export market for Cambodia because the distance, and we don't have those historic ties that it has, for example, with France. But actually, we're a bigger trading partner than France.
Right. Wow. That's significant.
Yeah, which is interesting and something that I hadn't realised before I started preparing to come here. So we're keen to help them grow those figures, and we sort of see that as being a positive contribution to Cambodia's development. So we actually have some programs that are specifically designed to do that. We have something called Trade for Development, which is a program of technical assistance to help firms, SMEs particularly, who want to export to the UK market but have not ever exported internationally before, to help them get ready and to be able to do that. And we've had some successes through that program already. So I think last year we had about $20 million worth of exports from Cambodia to the UK from the firms that we were working with who hadn't exported before. So that's significant. It's obviously, not as much as we want, but it's
for an SME, that's very significant. I mean, and sorry, can you just, for people listening in, how often does that program run, and how do people apply? Maybe just share a bit more on that.
So at the moment, it's been running for a couple of years, and people can't really apply for it. So I think that we've got an implementing partner, ITC.
Okay.
And they have basically done some analysis, looked at which companies fit into the sectors that we think there is potential for export to the UK. So a lot of them are in the agro industries, because obviously Cambodia has fantastic produce, is starting to grow its domestic processing capabilities, and not a lot of that is being exported to the UK so far, and all of that benefits from the DCTS. So that's an area that we prioritize, and we pick companies that are at the right stage of their development, where they're kind of not yet exporting but are close to being able to, so then our support can kind of help tip them over the edge, if you like.
Great. Yeah, that seems like a really good scheme for a lot of people. And as you say, I mean, I think agriculture is a big emphasis moving forward in this agro processing. Just as we're coming to the end of the podcast, we just want to touch on a few more personal things and just kind of how you go about your days. So what is some of the habits that you have in your day-to-day job? Because I'm sure you're meeting so many people, your days are packed. How do you stay calm? How do you stay relaxed in everything that you have to do on a daily basis?
So I'm a big believer in exercise.
Yeah.
So I mean that keeps me calm, and my wife will know straight away if I haven't done enough exercise, because I start getting cranky and irritable.
Yeah.
So I get up early every morning and do just some basic exercise at home, and then I like to run. So I run a couple of times a week, and I find that's the thing. If I don't do a proper long distance run a couple of times a week and wear myself out, then I'll start getting a little bit cranky. And then beyond that, I mean, just having kind of quite a clear focus each day on what the priorities are, what it is that I want. I'm a big believer in to-do lists. And that, again, helps me feel less stressed, because if I put it all down in paper, I don't need to carry it in my head. So I do have, kind of lots of systems for keeping track of work. So then I just don't have to sort of keep it in my mind all the time. So I'd say those are probably the main things I do to try and keep calm. The other thing is that I think self-awareness is something that I would encourage everybody to develop. Know what jobs within your day-to-day work give you energy and that make you feel inspired and make you feel happy and, give you the energy then to go on and do the things that maybe you enjoy a bit less. Because we're all like that. We've all got things that we like more and things we like less. Yeah. So making sure you structure your work day so you're doing enough of the things that give you energy to kind of help you get through the periods that you find a bit more draining. So for me, I'm a real people person. So I like interacting with people. So if I were to spend a whole day sat in my office writing strategies or papers or whatever, I would get quite worn out quite quickly. So if I need to do that kind of work, then it's good to sort of have a couple of hours and then have something where I know I'm going to have a chance to interact with people, because that will then re-energize me and then means if I need to, I can go back and do the sort of quiet thinking work. So I think that self-awareness about how you work and what motivates you, what energizes you is important. And
maybe just like, what would be like one or two really inspiring stories that have really stuck with you in your work so far in Cambodia? Like, are there any ones that stand out?
I mean, so in terms of the work that we at the UK have done, I mean, I think the things that I tend to find most inspiring actually are when you can see the difference at a level of an individual. So I can give you like big outcomes that we've achieved. But obviously, so we fund the Global Fund, which works to eradicate malaria. Cambodia is likely to be able to declare itself malaria-free this year. That's a huge achievement. But it's hard to sort of put your finger on, the human side of that and really know what difference that makes. So sometimes it's sort of seeing the really micro difference. We do a lot of work on demining as well. And I think, we've cleared tens of thousands of mines from Cambodia over the years through the funding that we've given. But for me, one of the things that made a big impact on me was after I did a visit to a minefield and did some social media posts, somebody sent me a message with a photograph saying, I think I've got a landmine in my garden. Wow. And I was able to connect them to Halo Trust, one of the British demining organisations here, who sent a team round. It wasn't a mine, but it was a rocket grenade. And they said it was, in an area that was residential, not far from where children played. So to be able to sort of actually, that really for me brought home the difference that we make in funding these organizations, that, you've removed a threat that could have severely injured or even potentially killed children through work that we do here. So that I find quite inspiring. And then in terms of individuals, there's a lot of really, really inspiring people in Cambodia who've gone on. So you mentioned before we started this podcast, Richard Yim, who, a young guy who's done fantastic work in all sorts of different business areas. There are lots and lots of young Cambodians who are dynamic, who are pushing the boundaries of what businesses here are doing. And that I think is really exciting. Yeah,
it's exactly. It's the same with us. Like, I would almost say like there's no real, with this podcast, it's like we get so much energy just from sitting and talking to some of these new change makers in the country, these new leaders that are coming through, that's what gives me the energy to keep going and staying inspired. Because, a lot of their stories and have been, it's not that, it's really not easy. It's like much easier if you're a startup or someone starting off in, Bangkok or Singapore, like, in Phnom Penh, it's still, most founders here, most people that are starting businesses, they've gone through a great deal more than that I could ever fathom. So we do quite a lot of work with women and with young people, and that's the thing when you think about the barriers that people have. So we participate each year in Girls Takeover, which is where a girl or a young woman takes over my job as ambassador for the day. Yeah. And when you talk to some of the women who participated in that came from a rural province, just had to fight to get an education, and then, managed to be fortunate enough to get a scholarship to come and study in Phnom Penh. And then, they find themselves in this position of being ambassador for the day and interacting with, the Cambodian government, UN agencies and so on. And you just think it's amazing that you've come from a village where you didn't even think you were going to be able to finish secondary school to see how far you've come. And that fills me with huge optimism about there's a number of young women we work with in that, where they're going to go from here. Because if they've achieved that much, age 19 or 20, imagine where they can go from there. Right. Yeah, no, in 5-10 years time, I think this country is going to look so different to what it looks like today. So yeah, it's great to be part of it. And yeah, thanks for taking the time today. We really enjoyed having you on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, and happy 150th birthday.